All right, so we're finally going to jump in and get our environment set up for Angular development. So there's a couple things we're going to need to install, and like I said, this is completely cross-platform, so even if you're on Mac or Linux, everything should be the same. We need to get Node.js installed because we need NPM, which is the Node Package Manager, and that's how we install the Angular CLI. So if you go to nodejs.org, you can grab Node.js. We're going to get the latest version here. At this time, it's 9.3.0, but it might be different depending on when you're watching this, and that's absolutely fine. So we're going to go ahead and download that. All right, while that's downloading, I'm also going to download Visual Studio Code, which is the text editor I'm using. You can see we're starting from absolute scratch here. So if we go to code.visualstudio.com, I'm going to click download for Windows, but like I said, it's completely cross-platform. And then the last thing I'm going to download is Git Bash. So this is available from git-scm.com. Now, it is cross-platform, but I would only really suggest it if you're on Windows. If you're on Mac or Linux, you already have a pretty good Bash terminal, so you don't really need it unless you want it. But if you're on Windows, it is something I'd suggest if you're not already using, for instance, the built-in Ubuntu system that Windows 10 or certain versions of Windows 10 comes with, or something like Commander, or maybe you have some other terminal program you use. But this is just what I would recommend. Not mandatory, just a suggestion. So we're going to grab that, and it also gives us the Git version control system, which is good. All right, so those are downloading. So it looks like they're all done now. So I'm going to open up Node.js first, and we'll get that set up. Just a simple installer. We're going to go through. Just click Next, Install, and that's going to get set up. And like I said, that's going to install Node.js, which comes with Node Package Manager. So we'll be able to run NPM commands. And if you're new to the command line, don't worry about it. Don't be intimidated by it. We're not going to do too much, and I'm going to explain everything we do. All right, so Node has been installed. Let's click Finish. So that's all set. Now we're going to go ahead and let's install Git Bash next. Like I said, this is not mandatory. I would just suggest it if you're on Windows. So we'll just go through this real quick. Everything is going to be pretty much default except for one screen, which is this right here. I'm going to choose to use Git and optional Unix tools from the Windows command prompt. That way, if you do use the standard Windows CMD, you'll have special Unix-based tools and commands there as well. And then the rest, we're just going to click Next. I'm also going to show you how to integrate this Git Bash terminal with VS Code. But again, please don't feel like you have to have this exact setup. You have to have all these plugins that I install. This is just my preference and what I suggest. Okay, everyone's different. Everyone has different preferences. Okay, so that's all set. I'm going to uncheck View Release Notes and just close this up, and then we're going to install Visual Studio Code. Just go through this real quick. We'll accept. That's good. That's good. Now right here, you want to be sure to check these two options to add the Open with Code action to the Explorer menu, so that when you right-click, you can say Open with Visual Studio Code. And then we'll just click Install. All right, so that's all set. I'm going to go ahead and leave the Launch Visual Studio Code checked and click Finish. And it's going to open up our text editor. All right, so first thing that's going to show is this welcome screen. I'm just going to close this up. And what I want to do is just go to the options or the settings. So if I go to Preferences, Settings, and this is where you can find all of the different options. And it's basically just one big JSON file with different options you can change. So some of these options I'm choosing for you guys. For instance, the font size, the default is 14 pixels. I'm going to change that so that you guys can see the code a little better. So what I'll do is click this little edit button. I'm going to say copy to settings, and it'll bring it over here. So this is basically our customized file with our custom options. And I'm going to change it from 14 to 26. And I'll do a save with Control S or Command S if you're on a Mac, and you'll see that it automatically kicks in. Another thing I want to change is the terminal font size. So I'm going to search for terminal, and we're going to go, let's see, it should be down here somewhere, right here. So terminal integrated font size, I'll click the edit, copy to settings, and I'm going to change it to 26 as well. Okay. And another thing I want to change is the word wrap. So I'm going to search for wrap. And you can see by default it's off. I want to go ahead and change that to on. So you can see over here now it's on. That way the code doesn't go off the screen and you guys can always see it. Another thing I like to change is my tab size. So by default it's 4, but I'm going to go ahead and change it to 2 just so the code isn't so spread out. And then the last thing I want to do is integrate Git Bash with our integrated terminal. By default, actually I'll just show you real quick. Let me just get rid of that last comma and save. I'm going to close the preferences for a second. And if I go to View, Integrated Terminal, this is one of the best features of VS Code. Let me just change this. Actually, I'll leave that for a second. But you can see that by default it uses PowerShell. And I don't want to use PowerShell, I want to use Git Bash, which I just installed. So this right here, it says you can change the default terminal shell by selecting the Customize button. Since I have Git Bash installed, it knows that and it's asking me what I want to use. I'm going to click Customize and I'm going to say Git Bash. And now you can see that this has changed up a little bit. It's now using Git Bash instead of PowerShell. Now if I go back to my preferences, or settings I should say, you'll see now there's an option here called Terminal Integrated Shell Windows, and it's pointed to Git Bash. If for some reason you didn't get that little pop-up where you could click Customize, you just have to paste this in here. Okay, and if you want to see that on this side, if we search for terminal, let's see, it should be down here, right here. So the default you can see is PowerShell. What we did is just brought it over here and changed it to Git Bash. And of course you have to have Git Bash installed. Alright, so our editor is set up. Now what I want to do, and by the way, you can toggle this terminal with Control and then the tilde, which is to the left of the number 1 key. So you can just, that's an easier way to bring it up. What I want to do now is install a couple extensions. So in VS Code, this is the extension icon. If I click this, you'll see a bunch of suggested extensions. But what I want first is Angular. If we just type in Angular, it should pop up. This one right here, Angular version 5 snippets, and it's the one by John Papa. That's the one that I prefer. So I'm going to click Install. And that's just going to give us things like syntax highlighting and IntelliSense, things like that. So once that's installed, we can click Reload, and now we have that installed on our VS Code. Another thing that I want to install is Bracket Colorizer. So if I go ahead and search for Bracket, it's right here, Bracket Pair Colorizer. What this does is if you have nested conditionals, if statements, or loops, or anything with brackets, parentheses, or curly braces, it's going to match the pairs by color. Okay, so you have like 3 basic colors that it'll match the pairs, and it makes your code much less confusing. So it's something that I use with just about every language, so I'm going to go ahead and install that as well. And you guys don't need to, this is just the stuff that I recommend. Alright, so I think that's all we need for now, at least. This should be good. Another thing I want to mention is Emmet, which is a fantastic, it's not a plugin for VS Code, it's actually part of the system, so you don't need to install it as a plugin. But if you're on Atom or Sublime Text or Brackets or another text editor, I would really suggest installing Emmet, which is E-M-M-E-T, and it allows us to do shortcodes or abbreviations for HTML and CSS. So for example, if I were to create a new file here, let me just open up I'm just using this as an example here. I just want an index.html file for a second, just to show you real quick. So with Emmet, if we want like an H1, we can say H1 tab. It gives us some H1 tags. If we want, for instance, an ID of test, we could do H1 hash test tab, and it gives us an H1 with an ID of test. If we wanted a class, we could use a dot. Okay, if we wanted to use not an H1 but just a div, we don't even have, I mean, we could do div hash and then let's say, I don't know, we'll say ID Brad. So we could do that, but if it's a div, we don't even have to type in div. We could just do hash Brad and it'll give us an ID of Brad with a div. Okay, same thing with class. We could do that as well. And then if we want to just generate an HTML page with head and body tags, we can just put exclamation tab and it'll give us just a general boilerplate. And if we want to generate some dummy text for some reason, so just some testing text, we could do lorem tab. That'll give us a paragraph. Or if we want to limit the number of words, we could say, for instance, lorem 10, or that's a 12, but 10 tab, and that'll give us 10 words. So Emmet is just awesome, and this is just for HTML. You can also do things with CSS as well. So I'd highly suggest using it. If you're not using VS Code, then go ahead and install it as a plugin with your text editor. If it's available, it is available with most text editors. All right, so I'm just going to go ahead and open up a new window and close this one out. And now we should be all set for development. All right, so like I said, you don't have to use all the stuff that I'm using. If you have a specific environment you use, that's absolutely fine. You can follow along just fine. This is just what I'm going to do and what I recommend. All right, so thanks for watching, guys. In the next video, we're going to start to look at the Angular CLI.